February 24, 1944. The roads south of Cisterna, Italy were muddy. American tankers from the 1st Armored Division crouched next to a huge German Elephant tank destroyer. It was disabled by engine fire and abandoned by its crew. The 70-ton monster sat silent, its thick armor marked by American tank shells that had bounced off the 200mm front plate with no effect. But as the American crews looked at this German monster up close for the first time, they noticed something that made them stop. There was almost no machine gun, almost none at all. These veterans had fought German tanks from North Africa through Sicily and now into the Italian mountains. They knew every Panzer, every assault gun, and every tank destroyer the Wehrmacht used. And every one of them had machine guns for close defense. But this Elephant had only a single ball-mounted machine gun in the front of the hull, fixed to fire forward. Nothing on the sides, nothing in the back, nothing on the top. The American soldiers understood immediately. This machine, which seemed almost unbeatable, with armor thick enough to stop American tank shells and a gun powerful enough to kill at 3 kilometers, could hardly protect itself against soldiers coming from the sides. The Germans had made one of the strongest, most heavily armed tank destroyers in the world, but it had almost no way to defend against infantry attacks. This discovery matched what intelligence reports from the Eastern Front had said. The Ferdinand, later called the Elephant, was both a success of German heavy armor engineering and a huge mistake in practical design. Its story would change how Americans thought about how not to build tanks and fighting vehicles. To understand how this mistake happened, you have to know the Ferdinand's strange beginning. In 1942, the German army held a contest for a new heavy tank that would rule battlefields in Europe and Russia. 2 companies joined. Henschel and Son made a normal design with the turret near the middle of the hull. Ferdinand Porsche, a personal friend of Adolf Hitler and a famous car engineer, made a radical design using an electric drive system with engines in the middle of the hull. Porsche was so sure his design would win that he ordered 100 chassis built before the competition even finished at the Neubau-Lungen factory in St. Valentine, Austria. His confidence turned out to be wrong during tests at Birka in April 1942. The Porsche design had trouble in deep mud and kept having mechanical problems with its new petrol-electric transmission. The Henschel design worked better, was more reliable, and won the contract, becoming the famous Tiger I tank. Porsche's 100 chassis were a huge investment, with no real use at the time. Instead of scrapping them, the German High Command decided to turn these chassis into heavy tank destroyers. Engineers moved the engines forward and built a huge fixed casement at the back to hold the main gun. The result was the Panzerjäger Tiger P, officially called SDKF 184, but better known by the unofficial name Ferdinand after his designer. 91 vehicles were converted between March and May 1943. The specifications were amazing. The Ferdinand weighed 65 tons, making it one of the heaviest armored fighting vehicles in the world in 1943. Its front armor was 200 millimeters thick, made by adding a 100 millimeter plate to the original 100 millimeter hull front. This made the Ferdinand's front armor twice as thick as the Tiger I. No Allied or Soviet anti-tank gun at the time could go through this armor from the front. The main gun was the 88 millimeter Panzerjäger Kanone 43 L71, one of the strongest anti-tank guns ever put on a tracked vehicle. This gun could go through 190 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters and destroy a Soviet T-34 tank from over 3 kilometers away. Soviet tank crews would later report that the Ferdinand destroyed their tanks from so far away that the German tank destroyer looked only like a tiny dot on the horizon. Inside the armored casement, 4 crew members worked the gun. The commander directed fire. The gunner aimed and fired, and 2 loaders handled the massive 88 millimeter rounds. The driver and radio operator sat in a separate compartment at the very front of the hull, completely cut off from the fighting compartment. Communication between the front and rear crew positions was only possible by radio, a strange setup that caused problems during battle. But the Ferdinand had serious weaknesses beyond its lack of defensive machine guns. The two Maybach 120 engines, originally made for much lighter vehicles, struggled to move the 65-ton monster. Maximum road speed was only 30 kilometers per hour. Cross-country speed dropped to a crawling 10 kilometers per hour. The complicated petrol-electric drive system was advanced but temperamental, often overheating in the small engine compartment. The suspension system had no return rollers, a cost-saving choice that made the tracks wear out much faster. The tracks, already under huge stress from the enormous weight, wore out quickly. Spare parts were always in short supply. The vehicle could only travel 90 kilometers across rough terrain before needing more fuel. Recovering damaged or broken down Ferdinands needed several Bergepanzer IV recovery vehicles working together because one vehicle could not move the massive weight. All 91 Ferdinands were sent to two heavy tank destroyer battalions. Schwere Panzerjäger Abteilung 653 received 45 vehicles. Schwere Panzerjäger Abteilung 654 received 44 vehicles. Together, these battalions formed the Heavy Panzerjäger Regiment 656 under the command of Oberst Rudolf Gill. Their first combat came at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943. Operation Citadel was Germany's attempt to destroy the huge Soviet bulge around the city of Kursk by attacking from both sides. Adolf Hitler had delayed the attack many times, waiting for new weapons like the Panther tank and the Ferdinand to arrive. He thought these wonder weapons would make up for the Soviets' greater numbers and give Germany a big victory. 89 Ferdinands were sent to attack the northern part of the front as part of Field Marshal Walter Model's 9th Army. Even before the battle began, 6 vehicles had to be pulled back for mechanical repairs, a worrying sign. The remaining 83 Ferdinands got ready to lead the German attack. On July 5, 1943, at about 0530 hours, Operation Citadel started. The Germans began their attack after a huge artillery bombardment. The Ferdinands moved forward as part of the leading assault, their job to destroy Soviet anti-tank guns and tanks from far away, letting lighter German tanks and infantry move forward safely. At first, the Ferdinands worked exactly as planned. Their strong guns destroyed Soviet tanks before the T-34s could get close enough to fight. Their thick armor could stop Soviet anti-tank fire that would have destroyed normal German tanks. Soviet tank crews were shocked to see shells bounce harmlessly off the 200mm front armor. Some crews left their positions instead of facing these nearly unbeatable German machines. But the Soviet defenses were much stronger than German intelligence expected. The Central Front alone had over 400,000 anti-tank mines in multiple defensive lines. The Ferdinand's heavy weight made it very vulnerable. When a mine exploded under a track, it often broke the suspension, bent the track, or ruined the road wheels. The 65-ton weight made repairs in the field almost impossible. Of the 45 Ferdinands from Schwere Panzerjäger Abteilung 653 used on the first day, all but 12 were stopped by mine damage before 1700 hours. Most could eventually be repaired and used again, but getting such huge vehicles off a battlefield was extremely hard. Soviet demolition teams went out at night to blow up abandoned Ferdinands with explosives. Even worse, Soviet infantry quickly found the Ferdinand's deadly weakness. The vehicle had almost no defense against soldiers attacking close by. The main gun could only turn a little and could not point low enough to hit targets nearby. There were no machine guns anywhere on the vehicle to protect it from close attacks. Once Soviet soldiers got close, Ferdinand crews had very few options. Soviet infantry learned fast. Special anti-tank teams figured out how to let the Ferdinands roll over their positions in trenches and foxholes before attacking. Soviet soldiers had training to get over fear of tanks, including exercises where tanks drove right over trenches filled with men. Once the Ferdinands passed the first defensive line, soldiers came out of cover with PTRD-41 anti-tank rifles, demolition charges, and Molotov cocktails. The PTRD-41 rifle could not go through the Ferdinand's thick armor, but it could damage the engine deck, tracks, and vision blocks. A well-aimed shot to the engine grills could start fires or ruin the cooling system. Shots to the tracks could stop the vehicle from moving. Once a Ferdinand was stuck, Soviet infantry swarmed it with Molotov cocktails and grenades. Molotov cocktails poured burning fuel over the engine deck. Grenades thrown onto the ventilation grills filled the inside with smoke and shrapnel. Ferdinand crews were trapped. They could not see soldiers hiding close to their vehicle because vision was extremely limited. They couldn't shoot them because there were no machine guns. These desperate efforts rarely saved the vehicle. The Battle of Kursk became a disaster for the Ferdinands. While they destroyed many Soviet tanks at long range, they suffered huge losses from mines and infantry attacks. German records say Schwere Panzerjägerabteilung 653 destroyed 320 enemy tanks while losing 13 Ferdinands in combat. Combined claims for both battalions said over 500 Soviet tanks were destroyed. But these numbers hid the truth. Most Ferdinand losses did not come from enemy tanks, but from mines, mechanical failure, and infantry attacks. Vehicles that were very good at long-range defense were being used as breakthrough weapons in attacks across heavily mined Soviet defensive lines. By July 12th, when Hitler canceled Operation Citadel and the Allied invasion of Sicily, only about 50 Ferdinands were still working out of the 89 that started the battle. The Kursk fight made German commanders realize the Ferdinand had serious design problems. In fall 1943, all surviving Ferdinands were sent back to Germany for major modifications. The refitting took several months at Neubauer Langen. Engineers added a ball-mounted MG-34 machine gun in the front hull for the radio operator, giving the vehicle at least some defense against infantry. They added a new commander's cupola with 7 vision blocks, the same type used on the Stug 3 assault gun, which greatly improved the commander's view of the battlefield. They applied Zimmerit anti-magnetic mine paste to the hull and superstructure. They improved the engine grille design for better protection. These changes added 5 tons, making the total weight 70 tons. No changes were made to the engines or transmission, so the already weak Ferdinand became even slower. On May 1, 1944, Hitler personally ordered the vehicle's name changed from Ferdinand to Elephant. In February 1944, 11 of the newly modified Elephants were sent quickly to Italy. The first company of Schwere Panzerjägerabteilung 653, led by Oberleutnant Helmut Ulrich, went to fight against the Allied landing at Anzio. American and British forces had landed south of Rome, trying to outflank the German defenses. Italy's mountainous terrain was even harder than the Russian steppe. Narrow mountain roads with steep slopes and sharp turns were not made for 70-ton vehicles. Bridges built for normal traffic could not hold the elephant's weight. The vehicles had to cross streams, climb rocky hills, and handle terrain that was hard even for lighter tanks. Mechanical breakdowns happened all the time. The engines overheated on steep climbs, transmissions failed under strain, tracks wore out very fast with no replacements in Italy. When an elephant broke down on a narrow mountain road, it blocked the whole route until it could be recovered or pushed aside. American tank crews first saw an elephant up close when Vehicle 102 from the 2nd Company broke down with engine fire in late May 1944. The crew abandoned it, and American engineers examined it carefully. They confirmed what intelligence reports from the Eastern Front had already said. The vehicle had amazing armor and firepower, but it had serious weaknesses. American intelligence reports noticed the elephant's very limited crew vision, especially to the sides and rear.
The single hull-mounted machine gun did not give enough defense, covering only a small area directly in front. Most importantly, the vehicle's heavy weight and weak engines made it very likely to break down. American tank crews decided they did not need to fear this vehicle in attacks because it would probably stop working before reaching the battlefield. American tactics focused on avoiding head-on fights where the Elephant's armor and gun gave it an overwhelming advantage. Instead, they attacked from the sides or rear, waited for the vehicles to fail, or called in artillery and air support against the Elephant's thin side and rear armor. Even American 75mm guns could destroy it. Of the 11 Elephants first sent to Italy, at least 3 were evacuated in August 1944. The others were lost during the spring and summer of 1944. Ferdinand 114 was destroyed on March 1st. Ferdinand 131 was knocked out on March 2nd. Ferdinand 113 was lost on May 25th. Many more vehicles were destroyed in June fighting around Cisterna. Most losses were caused by mechanical breakdowns, not enemy fire. The 5th Court of 211.0 captured Elephant Vehicle 102, which had been Ferdinand 633 at Kursk, and it was eventually sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for detailed testing. American engineers ran extensive tests confirming the vehicle's strengths and weaknesses. The tests showed that while the Elephant was very strong in its intended role, it was not practical for real battlefield conditions. The remaining Elephants on the Eastern Front continued fighting through 1944, mostly in defensive operations in Ukraine. 2 companies, with a total of 28 Elephants, were sent to support Army Group South near Tarnopol. The vehicles worked well when used in ambushes with infantry support, but there were never enough of them to make a big difference. Losses from fighting and mechanical failures slowly reduced their numbers. A small group of Elephants fought in defensive battles during the Soviet Vistula-Oder offensive in January 1945. As Soviet forces moved deep into Poland, the last surviving Elephants fought in defensive battles south of Berlin in April 1945. By the end of the war, only 2 Elephants survived intact. One Ferdinand, captured by Soviet forces at Kursk in July 1943, is now displayed at the Kubinka Tank Museum near Moscow. The Elephant captured by American forces in Italy now sits at Fort Gregg Adams in Virginia. The big question remained: how could German engineers build a 65-ton tank destroyer without enough defenses against infantry? The answer was in the vehicle's improvised design and the ideas behind German doctrine. The Ferdinand was never meant to fight alone. German combined arms doctrine said tank destroyers should work with infantry support. The infantry would protect the vehicle from enemy soldiers, while the tank destroyer attacked enemy tanks from far away. On paper, this made perfect sense. In real life, infantry could not always keep up with armored vehicles, especially across minefields or through strong enemy positions. Infantry could be pinned down by enemy fire while the tank destroyers moved ahead. In night battles or poor visibility, infantry and tanks could become separated. Any of these situations left the Ferdinand unprotected, and all of them happened often at Kursk. German designers had become too confident in their armor design ideas. They focused on maximum armor and maximum firepower while assuming that proper tactics would cover other weaknesses. The Ferdinand's designers believed its thick armor would stop anti-tank weapons and its long-range gun would keep enemy tanks far away. They did not think enough about close-range infantry threats. Even though years of combat had shown that tanks that were stuck or alone were very vulnerable. The decision to build the Ferdinand without enough machine guns was a deliberate design choice, not a mistake. It showed specific ideas about how it would be used that turned out to be deadly wrong in real fighting. The vehicle was made for a very narrow role: long-range anti-tank combat from prepared defensive positions with guaranteed infantry support. When used exactly that way, the Ferdinand was extremely effective. But war rarely gives perfect conditions. For American tank designers, the Elephant gave important negative lessons. It showed that paper specifications don't always mean the vehicle will work well on the battlefield. A tank could have the thickest armor and the strongest gun in the world, but still fail if it could not be maintained in the field, could not reach its fighting position, or could not defend against all types of threats. American tank destroyer doctrine focused on very different priorities. Vehicles like the M10 and M36 had much less armor than the Ferdinand, but they were faster, more reliable, mechanically simpler, and had multiple machine guns for self-defense. They were designed for mobility and practical use rather than maximum protection. American doctrine assumed tank destroyers would use hiding and maneuvering rather than heavy armor. The difference was clear. Germans built the ultimate defensive tank destroyer and learned that ultimate defensive strength meant nothing if the vehicle could not survive getting to its defensive position. Americans built less impressive but more practical vehicles that could actually finish their missions in real battlefield conditions. The story of the Ferdinand elephant shows the danger of over-specializing in weapon design. When the conditions matched the vehicle's narrow design, it was almost unstoppable. But when conditions changed even a little, its weaknesses were disastrous. Minefields stopped it, mechanical problems kept it from moving, infantry attacks destroyed it. The vehicle used a lot of scarce resources but gave only limited overall combat results. Today, military historians study the Ferdinand elephant as a warning story about practical design versus theoretical performance. The vehicle is used in armor development courses as an example of how impressive specifications can hide serious problems in real combat. It shows that weapons must be made for harsh battlefield conditions where nothing goes as planned, not for perfect situations that almost never happen. The two surviving examples stand as monuments to both German engineering ambition and the limits of over-specialized design. Museum visitors are amazed by the huge gun in extremely thick armor. Then they see the single small machine gun covering only the front and immediately understand why this seemingly invincible machine was actually very vulnerable. The most powerful tank destroyer of 1943 could be made helpless by the simplest threat, a man on foot with a grenade. For the Soviet soldiers who hunted Ferdinands across the killing fields of Kursk in the summer of 1943, the lack of defensive machine guns was a serious weakness they used skillfully. They made special tactics to defeat these monsters, knowing that if they got close, they could destroy a 65-ton steel fortress with very simple weapons, like a bottle of gasoline and a burning rag. For the American tankers who faced elephants in the mountains of Italy in spring 1944, knowing the vehicle had very limited defense and constant mechanical problems made it much less frightening. They learned to avoid the elephant's dangerous front and instead moved to attack from sides or rear where American guns could hit it, or they simply waited for the inevitable mechanical failure. The Ferdinand elephant finally showed that winning in modern war does not come from building the strongest single weapon, but from making practical weapons that soldiers can use effectively in real battles. The tank destroyer that could barely defend itself against infantry became a perfect example of bad design thinking, a lesson that influenced tank and armored vehicle development for many decades afterward. In the end, Ferdinand Porsche's repurposed chassis became one of the most controversial weapons of World War II. It had amazing kill ratios when used exactly as it was meant to be used. It caused fear in enemy tank crews who faced its huge gun and nearly impossible to penetrate frontal armor. But it also used huge amounts of resources, suffered terrible losses from simple threats, and in the end added very little to Germany's overall strategic position. The Ferdinand elephant stands as proof that in war, practical functionality is more important than impressive specifications, and that the most advanced weapon is not always the most effective weapon.